Hey, welcome to another episode of the Vector Accelerator podcast. It's the podcast with the most syllables on the planet. Check me on that. I'm Scott Schimmel, one of the co-founders, and I'm here with James Seastrom. And we were just joking that I've known James for, I think, 2 or 3 or 4 years, but I don't really know his transition story. So, James, you're effectively entering into what we call fireside chats on the show, where essentially we try to bring veterans in to talk about all the mistakes that they've made in their transition. So maybe you can start us off that way. Has there been a big failure, like hashtag transition fails? Have you, as you look back, like, is there something that you just really blew in your?
No, man.
We'll kind
My transition was perfect, dude. Like,
really? Oh,
I made all the right decisions, all the right. No, like absolutely not. And it's so interesting because you have all these resources and all of these people that are willing and wanting to help, but you will inevitably still make mistakes. Even the sound advice that you get might not be the right advice for you, or in my case, for me. And so my transition, I got out of the Navy after 20 years in 2022.
Okay.
I was living in Imperial Beach at the time, and we had this idea of like, hey, so my wife and I, we were just, we're going to start fresh. And, we were able to make a good profit on the house. So we sold the house, and I had an idea of what I wanted to do, but I didn't really know for sure. I just knew I wanted to explore a few things. I wanted to explore acting, which I did. And
I forgot that. Yes.
Yeah.
This is awesome. Okay, good.
And I did that. I had an agent, I had a manager.
Yeah. Did you get anything?
I had two movies. I had a couple of different auditions for Young Rock, the TV show on Fox.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
sweet.
It like doing Ric Flair, a young Ric Flair.
No way.
So it was interesting, man. Like I like screamed into a pillow, like talk about like trying to get method, right? I was like screaming into pillow to make my voice hoarse.
No way.
Yeah.
Wow.
But
you're
but
Daniel Day-Lewis, man.
Yeah, man. I want to get back into it, and I will eventually, but it is time consuming, and it is a lot. I remember we were traveling, and I would, I'd have a green screen with me in the car, packed in my bag, because I would
just in case.
Hey, self-tape, right? We need it tomorrow. It's just
yeah.
And so, yeah. So we were living with my wife's dad up in Fallbrook, and bless his soul, like it was, I'm very thankful that he opened up his home and we had that opportunity, but it was a very stressful time. And it wasn't conducive to my own mental health. And I was still pushing through. And
because of why? What do you mean?
Because why wasn't it good for my mental health?
Yeah.
Because it was a shared space that wasn't mine. And as a grown man, I felt weird, right? Of like not having my own home and living with him. And, there was this, like, we were just constantly tiptoeing, even though he never said we had to, or it was just this, like, I always felt like a guest. Yeah. And I could never get past that. And so, that just really weighed heavily on me and put me into a bad mindset. So decided I was going to get into the workforce, but it was like, as I transitioned, I was thinking about this before when we had a previous conversation. If there was one thing I could tell somebody that's transitioning, it's just explore titles and roles. Because as I was on the verge of getting out, or as I recently transitioned, it was like, what do you want to do? It's like, I don't know. Like, well, do you want to do, operations or HR? And I was like, oh, HR. And it was like, well, what do you want to do in HR? And I was like, there's other things. Like, there's leadership, there's employee benefits. And it's just like, I don't know. So those cups of coffee, you really have to have them and ask, like, hey, I see you're this. What is that? What do you do? What is a program manager versus a project manager at your company? That's the key, is at your company.
So ask kind of the obvious not so, not so obvious questions. And that happens in the corporate world. People have titles, they have roles. They just kind of assume you know what that means. But I mean, half the time I don't think they know what it means. So asking those obvious questions can help you figure out and narrow down. I don't know about you, but for me, a lot of times when I hear people talk about what they do, it's clarifying in that I never want to do that. It's like I hear what you do and I'm like, oh yeah, okay, that's what that is. Let's let's write that down. Make sure I never become a program manager. No offense to program managers out there. I'm sure you're dialed in on that.
Right. It's like data analyst or computer programming. I'm not a guy that sit behind a computer screen and just constantly look at code or anything like that. There's people that love that stuff and good for them.
Yeah.
But that was a key, right? And so I'll get into it, but like what you just said is, I ended up taking a role with NetSuite as a practice manager. But if you Google practice manager, you're going to come up with all kinds of things, especially a lot of stuff in healthcare.
Okay.
And I didn't deal with anything in healthcare. So I was a consulting practice manager. But it was interesting how I found the role. Yeah. I applied for a role just randomly. I was throwing shots, right? Uh-huh. What's going to stick? And I got offered a position at Wells Fargo, and I didn't really, the salary was like, no.
Yeah.
For moving and this and that, no. And so I applied for a job to go back to Kansas City because I'm originally from Kansas, Topeka area. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I can go back there. So I apply for the job. The recruiter hits me up and is like, hey, man, you don't meet the qualifications. What are you doing? And I screenshot, I was upset at this point because I've gone through different interviews. And so I screenshot the job description. I sent it back to him. I said, nowhere on there does it state any of the things that you told me.
Okay.
And he's like, you're right, man. I'll get it fixed. And a couple months later, he hits me up. He's like, hey, you still in the market? I was like, yeah, I am. And so he's like, I got a position for you. I think you'll be good for it. And so
you got practice manager vibes for sure.
Yeah, right. Well, I don't work there now. So, but it was good. Anyway, so I applied, went through the interview process. Okay. And then I took the job and moved to Austin.
Whoa.
And so packed up the family, we moved for the role. And that was, to me, that was a mistake in and of itself.
Okay.
So there was a few things that I would have done differently in that span. And the first would have been, if I was going to take the job, I would have moved myself for only just me. Okay. And taken that time away from the family, because very, very quickly into the role, I realized it wasn't fulfilling me in the way that I thought it was going to, when it was going through the job description and everything else. It was a lot of good benefits, and it did hit a lot of wickets. I had some awesome people that, I worked with and for, and actually Chris Spencer, who, I think has been, a vital part or, involved with Vector Accelerator.
Yeah. Number one fan, Chris, if you're watching.
Dude, solid dude.
Yeah.
Don't tell him I said that. If he's watching this, just edit it out. No.
We will.
But I had him as my immediate supervisor, which was the blessing. Because he, I would just be like, dude, I don't know. I don't think this is. And so we just would go back and forth and find the good parts about the job, and then ultimately realizing that, with what I had going on with family and with, so what I'm looking for, quality of life, just within the, back to the mental health space.
Yeah.
It was not the role for me. And so I ended up leaving there in October of last year.
Okay.
And so I'll pause there.
Yes, that's great.
Any questions?
No, I think it's interesting. I like how the job came about. And when you think about throwing shots, I think you said just throwing shots. Would you recommend that? I mean, it worked for you. So I feel like there's someone listening who's like, yeah, dude, I just gotta keep applying everywhere, anywhere and everywhere, and something's gonna work because it worked for James. And
I
that's
think it
true.
depends on,
There's enough stories like that. That's true.
and
But what
I
would
think
you
it really
recommend?
depends on your situation.
Okay.
You know, in my situation, I didn't have to,
Yeah.
you know, because I had a place, right? I
Yeah.
had a place to live. I had, you know, my pension coming in and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't that I necessarily had to.
Hmm.
And, you know, there's some people that there's a need to, hey, I just got to get income coming in, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it'd be great if I always go back to, and I forget who it was. Oh no, it was another Chris Lord,
Oh yeah.
right? He came up with the 5 things, right? There's 5 things you look for in a job, and it's,
Mm-hmm.
you know, love the people you work with, love what you do, make good money, live where
Yep.
you work, and what was the other one?
Work
I'm
where you
missing it.
live. No. You got most of them. We'll put it in the show notes.
Work
By the
where
way,
you,
this is the perfect teaser because it's chapter 1 in Vector Accelerator curriculum. So if you want to know the 5th one, you should sign up for
there.
it.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
So I thought of it, but I'll just leave it. We'll just leave that
Yeah,
cliffhanger.
don't say.
But you can only have 3 of those 5, right? And so, some people, it's like, hey, I need to. It doesn't matter how long I work. It doesn't matter where I work.
Yeah.
You know, and so you have to really figure out what's important to you and your family.
Yeah. Yeah. What along the way since 2022, what has been most helpful for you in getting clarity? You mentioned cups of coffee. You mentioned prioritization exercise. What, if you look at like the couple things that have been most helpful for you, what have they been?
Oh man, that's a great question. I think the most helpful is getting other people's perspective,
Mm-hmm.
and not tying myself to that, but at
Mm-hmm.
least hearing their perspective of me, right? Of just like, hey, looking at my experience, what would you gather from it?
Yeah.
You know, working with Chris and hearing his inputs on, being able to see me as a person, as a leader, knowing the struggles of a transitioning veteran, and all of those things was super beneficial. And
Hmm.
then also just being able to connect with other people that, you know, I think just like reaching out to you and just saying, hey man, I know it's been a while,
Yeah.
but like, how's it going?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And not letting those relationships fade.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's helped me get clarity on, and then just try new things, right? And that's how I ended up realizing like coaching is where I want to be.
Yeah. There we go. All right. So yeah, you're in this cubicle. I remember even seeing you in that cubicle and you just had like a real pasty look, real sad countenance. And I think it was a sign behind it was like, send help, please. So that wasn't fulfilling for you. And it can be for some, right? There are some people, like my sister works at a think tank. I don't know what she does, but she sits around in cubicles and I think they just like think all day and she
Throwing
loves it.
ideas, man.
Yeah. She thinks and gets paid for it. So if you're wired that way, cut off, just stop listening at this point, stop watching. So it's coaching. What was the thing? And I wonder if you can tie back to your experience in the Navy. Like, how did you connect those dots?
Very clearly. So, you know, I was a gunner's mate, you know, working with ordnance, explosives, doing instruction, you know, instructing, small arms instructing and stuff. And I enjoyed those things. But what I really loved was helping lead and develop, and, you know, taking somebody who like was an E5 and they're like, nah, man, I'm good. Like, I don't need to, you know, if I promote to E6, great, because then I can retire.
Hmm.
But that's it. Like, I don't really care.
Yeah.
And starting to develop them to where it's like they do something that they didn't think was possible.
Hmm.
And having those phone calls, even years later, having those emails of just like, hey man, I just need, thank you. Thank you for being there. Thank you for believing in me.
Yeah.
And so I took the role that I took, I was primarily it was sold to me as a coaching and developing role.
Okay.
And so that's why I was like all in.
Yeah.
And so I went through and I went through the Honor Foundation and was paired with an executive coach.
Mm-hmm.
And he was somebody that went through the entire coaching process, was ICF certified,
Mm-hmm.
and that International Coaching Federation. It's like the gold seal. And it was amazing what he was able to bring out of me, even in those moments where I didn't feel like talking or didn't know. Going into that meeting, I couldn't think. I was so stressed,
Yep.
And so I had conversations with him. So that's another one of those carrots of like, that's somebody to talk to. And then I went to a coaching seminar, or kind of like not a seminar, I guess, complimentary coaching to learn what it is.
Okay.
Through IPAC. And I was in, right. It's like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And I went, so the way it worked was we had 3 in-person modules throughout the course of like from March to October. And the rest of the time was just online learning and classes and stuff. And when I was in those classes, I had never felt more attuned, like like flow state. I know that gets thrown around a lot, but I like absolutely loved every bit of the conversations. I wasn't afraid to be vulnerable. I felt, and going through like Vector Accelerator and the Honor Foundation and stuff like that, it was encouraged, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I was still in that military, like not letting myself, nope.
Yeah.
But in that time, I let go. And so I think that was such an opening experience for me. And it doesn't matter what it is that you're trying to do.
Yeah.
But if you're going to experience something, if you're going to do it, learn to just let go and be in that process, because that's where you'll find who you are.
Is that a function of being ready for it, or is there like another way to think about it? Because you're not alone in going through transition and not fully being ready for like the soul searching that we would say is required. So I'm asking you a pretty existential question. Like, how do you help somebody be open to actual real self-reflection?
I think that's through, from my lens, it's through coaching. And one of the things of coaching is getting people to self-realize, or because I remember even just going through the courses, there were some people that were on it.
Yeah.
And you're just like, man, how is this dude doing this? Like, and because they were operating on a different plane. I think that they were closer towards when they were getting out before I was. So I think I fell under the, like, I still have time.
Yeah.
But I really think it's, how important is this to you, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, how important is it to go through this? Well, it's a 10. I need to figure this out. Why?
Yeah.
Well, I need to figure out, what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Why is that important right now?
There you go. That's so good.
And it's really getting people to answer those questions.
Yeah.
To where it's more of like, what do you want to do?
Mm-hmm.
And you brought up a good point of like, hey, I know what I don't want to do. Like coming out, I knew I had a whole laundry list of things that I didn't want to do.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I could just scratch those off the list, but then it's that not being afraid to just have, I remember having it, and I know I'm bouncing around, but it was, I think somebody referred me to a woman who used to be a marine biologist. I'm like, why? Just like, I don't want to be in marine biology. Like, why? I don't want to work at a phone company. And so I was so resistant to have this cup of coffee that when I did it, I didn't even understand. Like, I'm just doing it because I was told to talk to this person.
Yeah.
After the conversation, was like, hey, how'd it go? And I was like, it was good. Like, she seemed like a nice person, well, what'd you get out of it? I mean, not a whole lot. Like, I don't want to go into that field, and I don't want to go into that field.
Yeah.
And she's like, yeah, but you didn't understand or catch the flow of how she went from marine biology to computer data scientist or over here. And I'm like, oh, pull the thread, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I took it for face value. And I think that's, you got to look deeper.
Yeah. Well, what you're talking about is a different mindset or posture of those kinds of conversations. I have found myself, I don't know if it's when I'm lazy or just not prepared. When I go and have a cup of coffee with somebody and I just show up, I've done no prep work. I don't think about basic questions that are coaching questions. What do I want to get out of this meeting? What do I want to share about myself that could be helpful? And I just hi, nice to meet you. And then let the conversation be what it is. And I mean, so many times I look back, probably similar to you, I'm like, well, that was a wasted, time, versus showing up and having a set of questions I've thought about, or at the very least, maintaining like a posture of curiosity as they're sharing. And I think so often people are very polite in conversations. So I just kind of let you, wander or share what you're sharing, then I'll share what I'm sharing. When if I was being really curious, I would be like, hey, well, hold on a second. What do you mean by that? Or when you say project manager, what does that mean in your world? Like that curiosity can take you many layers deeper where you can actually start seeing threads, because chances are the person you're talking to isn't also showing up prepared, ready to ask, ready to be curious. So I want to maximize the time that I've got with them, which is just different than sitting back and hopefully they ask me some questions and they have a job for me. That's just a very different posture.
Well, and I think that's where a lot of people, and that's where I won't speak for anybody else. For me, I screwed up, and I wasn't necessarily looking for a connection, because I was just like, man, there's no way I'm going to be able to connect to all these people all the time. But, a case in point, we were talking before this, and I'll bring it up just because of the power of networking. So South by Southwest is a huge thing that goes on here in Austin. And I had met with somebody that I was meeting somebody for a cup of coffee, and we had never met in person. Everything's been COVID, 4 years. We're Austin, LA. So we're having a cup of coffee. And as we're sitting there, I was just, we were talking. I said, oh yeah, my friend's doing something. And we talked about that, what he's doing. And she's like, wait a minute, I think I'm supposed to go there. And so she gets on her phone. She's like, yeah, I got this invite from, Barry and Ben. And I'm like, I don't know those guys, but I know this guy. and come to find out, we knew each other from different ways. And it's like, that's the network.
Yeah.
Because he was wanting to try to talk to her about what he has going on. And, it shows, like, I think to her, oh, wait, James knows this guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then from his perspective of like, oh, James knows her.
Yes.
And I'm not a great human, but I'm not a bad human either. Right. So so it just helps solidify that relationship, by just a common denominator. And you never know who that common denominator is going to be.
Well, it becomes fun. At least for me, it's fun to be able to say, do you know that person? I actually know that person. And the idea of introducing people where they might find value in each other, at the very least as friends, if not something more, is a thrill. It's like, it feels like things are coming alive at that point, which is a different perspective than, obviously, a lot of people hear about 50 cups of coffee and it's overwhelming, or it sounds just boring, or like a lot of caffeine. I like the idea of collecting friends, and not just like, hey, I know this guy, I've got a connection, but actual friendship where you think about them and you're thoughtful. And I know for me, I haven't been doing this in the past few weeks, but I have a regular practice of just kind of scrolling through contacts. And I don't try to contact everybody. I'm not selling timeshare or anything. I've got nothing on the other side of this. But when I see somebody and it's just like, oh, I wonder what he's doing. I just sent a series of texts a couple weeks ago to people I haven't talked to in, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And I just said something like, hey, don't text me back. I just want to say, hey, I hope you're doing well. Hope your family's awesome. And I'm thinking about you. That's it. And I think if I did that 6 or 7 folks, I think 4 or 5, all of a sudden it turned into like a meaningful reconnection, which was very fun, felt very meaningful to me. I wonder for you, James, now that you're getting clarity on coaching, can you give us can you forecast what's the ideal state for you if you can see it? And it doesn't have to be necessarily size of the business or anything like that, but like what is you coming fully alive look like?
I love these questions because in the past week I've had to confront myself with them. I was talking with somebody the other day, and it was went through my spiel. He's like, "Hey, tell me about yourself. Who are you?" I gave him a rundown. He's like, "Cool. What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I took a breath, and he's like, "Seriously, man, you're a coach? Like, what does that mean?" And I was like, all right. I said, I want to be a keynote speaker that goes around and helps, not only speaks to people about resilience and building the life that they want to pursue, but I also want to help people and teams be able to increase their performance to meet the goals and overcome the obstacles that are keeping them from achieving that. Yeah. He's like, there you go. That's what I like. Yeah. And it was the first time I really said it to somebody I didn't know. And it came out with so much passion that right. Yeah. That's what, and I don't know, I don't want to put a cap on the business, but if you were to say, hey, James, a year from now, where do you want your business to be? Like, I want it to be a thriving business. Right? I want it to be to where it is clients coming, and hopefully, I coach them to where they don't need me, but they know that I'm there, to where if it's ever one of those, hey man, I need you again. Right. Cool. We got it. Yeah. But to where it's raising their awareness and their consciousness about the things that are happening in their life to where they can be self-sustaining.
Yeah. Well, coaching is powerful. I remember a similar experience for me a long time ago, 10 or 12 years ago. I was invited to a day to get trained and certified as a coach for this guy's coaching practice. And I went because I was thrilled to get like that certificate, and I like developing people. But I remember thinking, this doesn't work. Just asking people questions. And then halfway through the day, they paired us up with strangers from different industries, never met them before. And I was by far the most junior person there. And all of a sudden I'm being coached. I'm coaching these people through a set of questions in a process. And no kidding, there's this problem that I'd had for over a year, leadership problem, management problem. And I kind of framed that as, this is what I'd like to talk about. And I'd say no more than 5 minutes of coaching, being coached. I had insight of what the actual problem was and a plan, and I went home and did it. And it changed, it had a huge effect. So I remember actually, in real time, I'm thinking, this actually works. Like this is powerful. This is, I don't know what this is, but I want to do it some more. So the fact that you're going to be doing that fires me up. And I know you started a podcast recently. Would you tell us about that?
Oh yeah. So, I've had a podcast in my mind for probably 2 to 3 years. Okay. And, I talk about, limiting beliefs or assumptions. Like I didn't have the right equipment. I didn't have the right structure. I didn't know how to use this or that. Yeah. And I would talk to a few people and I'd ask questions. Yeah. But I just never felt ready. And so, after moving away from my job in October and doing the coaching business, it was one of those like, hey, why not? Like, you just got to start getting in there and doing it. And, so I have 2 episodes in where I've talked to 2 different Air Force veterans. And once again, both through networking, like I didn't know them personally until, we established a relationship, and then it was, hey man, I really want to talk about your life. Yeah. I think and then I have a 3rd episode we're actually recording tomorrow. And so nice. Really looking forward to to having another guest on the show. But it's, each one is, you had put up some stuff and a group to where we could get feedback. And man, that was so scary. Like to drop it in there and say, critique me. Right. But I did it and I survived it. Right. I got some good feedback. I got some bad feedback, or not good or bad. I mean, there was some positive reflections, and then there was some others of like, hey, you should take a look at this. And it might make it better. And so I did that, went through, did some learning, went back in. And I think even going from episode 1 to episode 2 was vastly different. And so I'm excited to play with it and, get messages out there.
Well, so I've listened to both, watched both. You are very gifted at creating a space where you're talking about real stuff, which is very rare. And to talk about someone's life, especially you don't know them too well, and to guide them to a place where they're sharing stuff they might not normally probably share, especially on the internet. You have certainly a knack for that. And I think as a viewer, I also get to see you coach. And I think I'm guessing that that's going to be very helpful as you build a coaching practice, because coaching can be mysterious. It can be abstract. Like, what is it? What happens? And you'll be able to point to these episodes and say, well, watch these episodes and you'll get a glimpse. And if you want that too, that's what this will be like. So I think hopefully it's already meeting a need for you, like fulfilling you. But I think I can imagine it being a business asset. And not to mention that, I think it's very honoring to have somebody, give them a chance to share their perspective in their life. And that's a gift in and of itself. I'm someone, I don't think it's that rare. Maybe it is weird. I love hearing people's stories. So I'm already subscribed. I'll be watching and listening, and both for you to grow into that, but also because you're bringing fascinating people into this space. So it's called
the Be Formidable podcast.
And I don't know if you're looking for more guests, are you?
Always.
Yeah. You got to be ready to be real with James.
Yeah,
and
you do. And it's on Apple, Spotify, YouTube. But thank you for I appreciate you saying the words that you said. But really, it's the guests. I kind of just ask questions, maybe give my 2 cents here and there. But it's really just them being willing to come out there and talk about something that happened in their life, what got them through it, maybe what they're struggling with now. And so I just really appreciate the people that do come on and are able to remove that wall, and I think I admire it so much because I was unable to do that for so many years.
Yeah. Well, you're doing me a big favor and us a big favor by being our guest. Thank you for being a part of the show. I've seen you, I think, in 3 different transition programs. And you're a great example to me of someone that doesn't go through and get it kind of figured out at once, but you're modeling someone who's continuously reorienting to your true self as you discover what that is. So thank you for that courage. Thanks for being a role model. Thanks for being a friend. And I wish you all the best in the podcast and being a coach. So hope there's a long line of folks coming to get support from you and receiving benefit from you. So anyways, thanks for being on the show, James. Wish you all the best. We'll share stuff about how to find you in the show notes, and we'll be back soon with another episode of the Vector Accelerator podcast.
Awesome, man. Thanks for having me.